Well, I mean, as the introduction said, I work for prisoners on death row. These are prisoners sentenced to death for crimes like rape, murder, kidnapping, and terror. And my colleagues and I have started this sort of collective where we make sure that they get legal representation. When I was thinking about this talk, actually, I think I was really struggling with how on earth do I compress this sort of issue into 18 minutes? And what is it that I can tell you about the death penalty that you haven't heard or you don't know of? Should I be talking about the death penalty as this sort of abstract idea as a punishment of whether it's just, of whether it's good or bad? Or should I be telling you about the stories of prisoners on death row and what it means to be sentenced to death today and what it means to know that you could be executed or you could be hung to death? Or should I be telling you about the impact it has on families of these prisoners and the sort of socio-economic background they come from and what it does to their lives? Or should I be telling you about my own struggle in having to understand this issue, in coming to terms with these questions about life and death, and the fact that these questions are very much entrusted to me as their lawyer, and the fact that I have to discharge this sort of burden very responsibly and very ethically? And I think in trying to come up with what I'm supposed to say, I realized that all of this is actually part of what it means to be sentenced to death today and what it means to be on death row. All of this, the families, the prisoner, the lawyers are all very much part of this system that is, as I have experienced, an extremely complex, ethically compromised, and a very unjust system. So it's also about telling you these stories in the hope that you will be able to look at the other side and not always believe what is told to you as you read them in the papers. And to give an example of how surreal this sort of topic can be, I was traveling to a particular city and to visit a prison, and I was staying in the hotel and having a chat with the manager about how far the prison is and how I can get there easily. And he looks at me and he laughs and he's like, "Madam, aap mazak kar rahe hain, aap jail to nahi ja rahe hain, aap kuch bhi bol rahe hain." And I was like, no, I'm supposed to go to prison. I mean, it's that sort of conversation that's when you realize that something like prison is very, very surreal to people who aren't as close to it as I've been. Part of being on death row is also today the uncertainty that prisoners are left with and the constant oscillation that they go through, that of between life and death, not knowing when they're going to die, of constantly having to move from hope to despair to depression to developing mental illnesses like schizophrenia or hallucinations, because you just do not know when you're going to get that, I won't say knock on the door, but the rattle of the lock on your cell to say, well, I'm sorry, you've exhausted your legal options and you're going to be executed. On one of my visits to another prison with my colleague, somewhere in a very small town in North India, we were sitting in the superintendent's office and waiting to meet a prisoner on death row. And it was, I think, a very busy day for the prison. There was a lot of running around, and clearly there was some big shot official coming to meet the prison staff. And so the superintendent is sitting on the other side, and he's very, dapper in his uniform. And next to us are all these other prison officials. So one of them looks at him and says, अरे सर क्या बात है, you're looking very good today, और आज आप जल्दी भी आ गए office, क्या बात है? So he was telling him, yes, there's some big shot official that's coming, and so we all have to be early and prepared. And then he says this very interesting thing about, and I'm saying this in Hindi, he says कि बड़े अधिकारी और मौत, ये दोनों कब आते हैं ये किसी को नहीं पता, which very loosely translated means that the two things in life that are very uncertain are, one is when your boss comes to work, and two is death. And it was, when I went back and thought about what he said, I realized that it's very ironic that he should make this statement about how uncertain it is, how uncertain death is, because that is precisely what prisoners go through today. Apart from the final act of the execution itself, from the time you're arrested until the time you're finally told that you can no longer live, there is a very long period within which you have no contact with your family. You are not allowed to work. The only other people you can interact with are other prisoners on death row. So if I were to give you a visual of what it's like in prison, so they have an area called the death barracks, where you only have prisoners on death row that are housed there. They're segregated from the rest of the population. They're not allowed to interact with under trials or people convicted for lesser sentences. And so one is that they're segregated from the general population. They cannot work. So unlike other prisoners who engage in carpentry or woodwork or these sort of vocational courses that the jail provides for you, so you can, when you are released from prison, you can be a productive part of society. Prisoners on death row are not given those opportunities. And the only thing they can do is read and study. And this is even worse for prisoners who can't even read or write. And there are several of those as well. Now, within the death barracks, you also have the gallows, where the execution actually takes place. And on one of these visits, I was escorted to the gallows. When I was being shown around the prison. And it is what I suppose you've seen in movies or in photos. It is what you would imagine it to be, which is the noose, a very thick rope that can probably and should be holding the weight of a man when it's dropped. And something else that I didn't know, which is below the gallows, you also have a sort of a tank, a water tank, where after the body falls, they sort of drop it into the water to clean it of any excrement or urine that is secreted as part of the biological process of dying. And the water washes away all of that, and then they fish it out. They do the post-mortem and get into the formalities of recording when the death happens. And I remember this, the experience of actually seeing this physical proximity you have with the gallows is what gives you a sense that this is something that's unnatural. I don't think I thought of it in terms of whether it's moral or legal or whether anyone deserved to die or not. I think just the the space in which the gallows were and what it looked like and what it meant to have someone be told that that's your fate, I think is when I began my relationship with the death penalty, really. And when I was forced to be intimate with some extremely difficult questions about what do I tell prisoners and their families about their cases, and how do I convey their stories in court, which is where ultimately their fate is decided. This family I met as part of interviewing prisoners on death row was one where I called them up to find out where they were living. I wanted their address. And on the other side, the father of the convict told me, oh, just come to the road outside the prison, we live there. So I said, no, I mean, we can meet in your house or something like that. We don't have to meet on the road. And he said, no, the road is my house. I don't have a house. And so my colleague and I went to that road, and we had to ask a coconut seller, do you know this person? I mean, he said he lives on this road, and he said, yeah, he sleeps there with his wife on this bench. So why don't you just wait there on the bench and they'll come. And then when I met them, they proceeded to tell me their story of what happened after their son was accused of this crime of rape and murder, and what happened to them. They were kicked out of their house, them and their belongings. The landlord just threw them out for no reason. They were completely ostracized from the community. They had absolutely no support. And they weren't allowed back in. Nobody wanted them. And so they were forced to live on that road with absolutely no assistance from anyone. And I think it is these sorts of questions that you're forced to deal with when you're working on the death penalty that makes you wonder if is this what justice is supposed to look like? Is this what they mean when they say, yes, justice has been done and this person has been sentenced to death? Because what we see on the other side is extremely different. The poverty is stark. The abject depression that families and prisoners are in once they've realized that hanging is what their fate is extremely evident in the way they talk to you. And it's only once we start dealing with these questions is when we can humanize it in some way. Because so much of the conversation I have with people about the death penalty is, are you repulsed by prisoners? Are you scared of meeting them? What is it like to go to jail? What do you feel if they admit to you that they've done the crime? And I always say that these aren't the questions that I have to deal with at this moment, because what I've seen before that, much before that, are these sorts of the structural discrimination within the system, a system that doesn't account for the fact that you're from a lower caste or that you're from a minority community, that you've never been to school, that your family that all your family members are daily wage laborers, and that you have never had a decent lawyer to whom you could tell your story and who could defend you in court. And so when you look at this side of the story, you realize there is no right or wrong when you're talking about the death penalty. It is really having a conversation about all these issues that come up before that, about custodial torture, about being framed for a crime that you didn't commit. And that's something we do not think about, because it's very easy for us to dehumanize the experience and make it seem as though we have nothing to do with it and that we have no role to play in all of this. And that is part of my own struggle in having to understand and grapple with questions of life and death every day. Now, I'd just like to end with the story of one of the prisoners I met who died of AIDS a few months ago. He'd been on death row for about 8 years. And when I first met him, it was in prison, of course. And I remember he could barely walk. So he had someone escorting him. He'd extremely frail, had lost all his weight. And he was coming towards the meeting room where the phone is, and you can talk over the phone through the glass barrier now. And as he was walking there, he couldn't even lift up the receiver to talk to me. He was that weak. And clearly the disease had progressed that far. So I spoke to him about his case, and I said, look, this is what we're doing for you now, and this is how your case is going to go. And we also learned that you have HIV. And we assumed that, of course, he would like to be taken outside prison into a shelter home or the hospital where he could be taken care of. So we asked him, would you like us to petition the court for you and say that to them? And ask for a compassionate release, maybe. And he said, I'd rather die in prison than have you put me in hospital. My family's abandoned me. I have no one. And the people in prison are my friends. They're the ones who take care of me. They bathe me, they clothe me, they bring me my water every morning, they bring me my medicines, and they are the only family I have. So please, please don't make me go to hospital. I do not want to go there because they don't care about you. And I think that the power of that emotion, I think it really threw us all off balance, because until now we also assume that prisoners on death row would want certain things or not want certain things. And certainly we didn't think that this was a prisoner who'd want to die in prison. But it's the sort of strange way in which his life worked, that despite the fact that he was on death row, he didn't want to die outside of prison because he had no one. And he would have had someone if he wasn't in that sort of convoluted system in the first place. Thank you.